More news today. Violence has once again flared up.
These are the images the world has been seeing from the streets of Canada.
Giant corporations rule the day.
Welcome to the future, bringing you the latest in science and technology from around Russia.
We've got the future covered.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time to go back to Chile and talk with Gonzalo Lira, one of the regulars here on the Keiser Report. Why? Because he's in Chile, and Chile and Brazil are like the only countries that are doing well these days. Gonzalo, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
It's a pleasure being on, Max. Thanks for having me on.
All right, now, Gonzalo, apparently Chile's central bank has joined the other insane central banks around the world. Bloomberg reports that Chile's central bank is to buy $12 billion to stem the peso region-beating rally. This looks like another chapter in the currency war. What's going on?
Yeah, exactly. It's another part of the race to the bottom. The problem for Chile is that Chile has an economy of about 163 billion as of 2009 numbers. And, 12 billion, as you can tell, is, about roughly 7.5%, 8% of that economy. The problem was that the dollar was collapsing against the peso so rapidly that it was really killing exporters here. Chile is the largest exporter of copper in the world, as well as zinc, nitrates, gold, silver. And so because of the rise in commodity prices, the peso was accruing tremendous value against the dollar. It had risen, I believe, about 30% since the lows of the 2008 crises. 30% in 2 years. I mean, it was just killing exporters.
All right, Gonzalo, walk us through this methodology here. In other words, all these countries around the world are trying to export their way back to growth after the huge financial collapse of 2008. But clearly, this currency war, beggar thy neighbor policy, it can't result in everybody winning. It sounds like, everybody's going to lose in the end, or is it a game of chicken? And where does this all end up going?
That is the million-dollar question, or the billion-dollar question, or the trillion-dollar question. Nobody really knows how it's going to end, but it's going to end badly. A beggar thy neighbor policy actually works when you have a medium-sized or smaller economy amidst other economies that are doing okay, and you basically devalue your currency to dig your way out of a hole that you've dug. A classic example is, for instance, Sweden. In the early 90s, when they had their own banking crisis, and they recapitalized those banks, devalued the krona, and dug their way out of their hole. But the problem is that when the reserve currency, the largest economy in the world, starts doing a beggar thy neighbor policy, it has a tremendous impact, a nefarious impact, on all the other developing economies. Not just developing economies, but all economies, full stop.
Yeah, you mentioned the world's reserve currency, the U.S. dollar, is the #1 offender. And, of course, it is the world's reserve currency, so you wouldn't want them to be in a position of trying to beggar thy neighbor in this way to accentuate the problems, as you write in a blog recently, Gonzalo, quote, is the Federal Reserve really purchasing over 60% of 2011's fiscal deficit? In a word, yeah. Okay, tell us what's going on here.
It's just basic math. I mean, this is the tragedy of it. Nobody seems to have noticed it. Everybody's been noticing QE2, quantitative easing 2, the recently announced policy of purchasing $600 billion over 8 months to prop up, the Treasury bonds and keep yields low. But nobody's looking at it from the opposite end, which is basically between the reinvestments of QE Light and this $600 billion of QE2, you basically have between 60 and 70% of the fiscal year 2011 debt, U.S. government debt, being purchased by the Federal Reserve. I mean, basically monetizing that debt. So the only conclusion is that the United States has officially become a banana republic, but with nukes.
Right, so, okay, the government is buying 60% of its own debt issuance. You're saying they're monetizing 50% of that, which means that they are printing dollars to buy the debt, to monetize the purchases. And, of course, that purchased debt is used to pay off a lot of the structural debt that's still on the balance sheet going back to 2008. So it's not showing up necessarily in the CPI numbers, the consumer price inflation, but at the same time you see on the product side, people, they go to the store and they buy a can of Coca-Cola and it's a third of the size less than it was a month before. It reminds me, going back to Roman times, didn't they clip the coins? They took little under Nero or one of those, you know.
I think it was Augustus. I think that it was Augustus who started doing that, of clipping them and mixing tin and copper with silver in order to get, you know, basically to debase the currency. Yeah, that's what they're basically doing, you know. And it seems that, you know, when empires start to decay, this is one of the things that they start doing. They start creating a police state, as the Romans did under Augustus, or Tiberius, rather. And, you know, the United States today, under the, you know, the Homeland Security, you know, stop the terrorist police state that's being occurring. Another effect is this debasement of the currency.
Right. So that's an interesting, actually, analogy there. The police state in Roman times coinciding with the government debasing the currency. And now you've got a virtual debasement going on with the downsizing of these consumer products. People going to the store and they're finding that the coffee is no longer Colombian coffee. It just says kind of generic coffee, but the price is the same. Simultaneously, they're monetizing the debt. Simultaneously, they're hiding through the shadow banking system a lot of the banking debt that is still yet to be disclosed. Of course, they can always flash that whenever they need to hold up Congress for an additional bailout. So tell us about, you know, it all kind of shows up in the debt ceiling. How far higher can the debt ceiling go?
The debt ceiling can go as high as Congress wants it to go. Ultimately, you know, in a democracy, Karl Marx said it best, a democracy goes down the tubes when the people realize that they can vote themselves all the money in the treasury. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's the basic upshot of the quote. The Congress can, you know, decide that they're going to increase the debt ceiling to $100 trillion, billion, gazillion dollars, and presto changeo, that's the law. Now, of course, you have this issue between the Treasury issuance of Treasury notes in order to finance the deficit and the Federal Reserve that is printing money in order to fill up that hole. So ultimately, you know, you don't see an end to this policy. The only way it's going to end is in tears.
Now, you do see some relative strength in the U.S. dollar, and people are saying, well, you know, the rise in interest rates, the 10-year yield, is indicative of a strengthening U.S. economy. Is that the right conclusion?
My conclusion is that both the equities market, which everybody knows is in la-la land, and now the bond market are just fictions. That's my own sense. The only thing I'm paying attention to is commodities, and commodities are just continually rising. And so it seems increasingly clear that between the manipulation of the equities market, the clear manipulation of the Treasury bond market by the Federal Reserve, I mean, they are putting so much money into the market that it is inevitable that they can manipulate it at will. I don't really, a lot of people talk about the bond market, the Treasury bond market, but to me it's just a fiction in a long-term outlook. You know, sure, you know, short term it goes up, it goes down, yields widen, yields grow narrower, but long term it doesn't really matter because it's all going, frankly, it's all going to hell in a handcart. And the only thing that matters at this point, to me at any rate, are commodities. And it's not that I'm a big gold bug or I'm somebody I don't trade regularly in commodities, to tell you the truth. I've only gotten into it in the last year. But it's inevitable that that's the future because the way that the policies are being implemented, both in the United States and in Europe. I mean, we can't forget Europe and how badly they mishandled the relatively paltry crises in Greece and Ireland, that you recognize that the people who are running the two major currencies of the world really don't seem to know what they're doing.
Okay, now you're in Latin America, and of course that region is associated with the banana republics of the 1970s. We've got a couple of minutes. Just kind of go through some of the telltale signs that you see in the U.S. right now that for you, having studied the economy in Central Latin America in the 1970s, some of the warning signs, some of the red flags you see popping up that are a direct analogy to what happened in the 70s in South America.
Well, what happened in South America was over-indebtedness because they pegged in many countries, they pegged the local currency to the dollar, and thereby they were able to access a whole host of credit facilities, and they got over-indebted, and it all ended in tears. Now, the same thing seems to have happened in the United States, but the only difference was that the United States was able to prop up its banks without doing the necessary surgery and amputations that are necessary to a dead banking sector. They propped them up and they created the zombie banks, the too big to fail banks. Now, the United States has not had a day of reckoning with its financial situation. And so those zombie banks are still going out there, and what is happening is that all this money printing has been going into commodities, which seems to be where the store of value is. I shudder because it seems to me that the people who are running things in the United States have not learned anything from the hard-won experiences of Latin American countries and other emerging markets that had a similar situation as to what the United States is going through today, and yet have not taken to heart the lessons learned from those very painful episodes. So I think that the United States is bound to suffer the same fate.
Let me ask you about a conundrum that folks seem to overlook. The U.S., the dollar, world reserve currency, all major commodities are priced in U.S. dollars. And here in the United States, people say, well, a lower dollar, of course, means that the U.S., through this beggar thy neighbor policy, is able to export its way toward a greater GDP growth. However, due to the fact that these commodities are priced in dollars, the lower dollar means that their import cost for the basic materials that go into manufacturing equal or more than offset the gain that they would pick up on the export side. Is that a conundrum that they're going to be able to escape, or is that another kind of, death knell for the dollar?
I think they're not going to be able to escape that conundrum. You're exactly right. I mean, if you're trying to export your way out, but you need to import raw materials for your exports, then you're taking from Peter to give to Paul. It's not going to help your situation at all, and also it's going to be hurting other countries that depend on dollar-denominated commodities, especially agricultural commodities. Something that I'm going to be writing about is how food prices are rising across the rest of the world, and hurting poorer countries because of this beggar thy neighbor policy. Now, of course, the United States has to look after itself. It can't be assigning monetary policy in order to make sure that the people in Bangladesh are fed. But still, this policy of beggar thy neighbor is having tremendous effects in the world economy. And since it's never been done before, we don't really know how it's going to end. But we can predict that it's going to end badly.
Well, one last question, which, folks on Wall Street who are speculating in the paper market for commodities and for the most part driving the price higher on the paper side, of course, their budgets for food as a percentage of income is probably 1%. Now,
Sure.
So they don't feel the effect of a rising food price on their monthly budget, whereas people in developing countries like India, probably 60, 70, 80% of their income goes to food, and so it just smacks them right in the face. Now, can anyone explain to these people